would like to come onto the stage. This is a session which carries on somewhat from the closing session of yesterday evening on veterinary regulation. This is going to be about equine welfare. After this session and before the coffee break, we're going to have a special presentation from Winfried, the chairman of the Asian Racing Federation, on the potential developments in China's Hainan province. That's a little change to the published schedule. But let's begin this session. I'd like to invite Francis Nelson QC is also going to chair this session. Francis is the chair of Racing Australia. Francis, please.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's all about the horse. The horse is integral to the sport of racing. Racing is the celebration of the equine and the human athlete and the extraordinary collaboration that we see between the two. So the health and welfare of the horse during its racing career is critical to the sport. But horses have a life after racing too. And as Winfried said, one of the challenges we face is making the horse relevant, making the thoroughbred relevant, causing people to have an emotional attachment to the animal. That's a big challenge in an increasingly urbanised society where sometimes children have to be taken to a specific place because they think that milk comes from a carton, not from a cow. The welfare of the horse after racing is an aspect where we can engage the public in racing. And I'll give you an example. In my country, Australia, we had a horse called Bash Boy. He became something of a folk hero in his racing career. He was a steeplechaser. And he won a number of feature races and he had quite a following. Since his retirement, he's become quite a good show jumper and he's done very well. So he's become popular in that area too. Now, not every horse can do that, but it's also an aspect of our integrity that we have a concern for horses who retire from racing, but who still have some ability to carve out a career in another area, whether it's trail riding or dressage or pleasure riding, eventing, show jumping. It's something that needs to be encouraged and it's something that we need to communicate very much to the community. It's an extension, if you like, of our sport, but it also is another vehicle to engage the public in the perception of the thoroughbred. Yesterday, there was much concentration on the welfare of the horse in racing, and I must say I found the sessions yesterday afternoon absolutely riveting. They were so informative. Today, you're going to hear from a number of speakers who will talk about the welfare of the horse, but also the welfare of the horse after racing. So today's session will give you another dimension to that. I'm going to introduce Jim Gagliano from USA, who's going to be our first presenter. Jim, of course, is well known to the racing community, but he has a specific interest, having been as I was, at the inaugural formation of the International Forum for the Aftercare of Racehorses in Newmarket some years ago. So you'll be fascinated to hear what his country is doing in terms of welfare for horses after their retirement. So let me introduce Jim.
Thank you, Francis. First, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the Asian Racing Federation and the Korean Racing Authority for what is a first-class conference. We're humbled to be here. We know how difficult these conferences are to put together, and this one is first rate in all respects. I hope that all of you that are here today and your organizations are focused on aftercare in some form with regard to the thoroughbreds competing in your countries. While I recognize that the welfare of animals and how animals are perceived varies from country to country and even among individuals, animal welfare is a vital component for the future of racing. Whether someone is an owner, a trainer, or a casual fan, the basic passion for the horse is most likely what brought them to the sport. Considering the immediate access to global news via the internet and social media, how our sport is perceived and how we treat the equine athletes who are the lifeblood of our sport is more important than ever. The International Forum for the Aftercare of Racehorses, or IFAR, was created as an independent forum that recognizes geographical and industry differences among racing countries and is designed to enhance thoroughbred aftercare worldwide. Working with the International Federation of Horse Racing Authorities, IFAR raises awareness of the importance of welfare for thoroughbreds, improves education on lifetime care, and helps increase demand for former racehorses in other equestrian sports. Our first conference, held in conjunction with a Pan American conference in Washington, D.C. in May of 2017, was very well attended and garnered support throughout the racing world. Topics covered all aspects of aftercare, including post-racing options, connecting aftercare and horse players, harmonization of rules of racing for owners, and standards for aftercare providers. Monday's agenda, we just had this past Monday, proved to be as informative and diverse. Over the next few years, IFAR plans to develop into a world leader on aftercare strategy. We hope to have all racing jurisdictions sign an aftercare code of practice and develop traceability systems to track all racehorses. The long-term goals of IFAR are to create a global racing industry united and informed on aftercare issues, to have comprehensive programs in place to advocate and educate on lifetime care, to ensure all horse racing jurisdictions have aftercare programs and share best practices, and to develop partnerships on new aftercare initiatives. In the US, we have focused on aftercare for many years, but we still have much to learn from other countries. And I'm glad that IFAR enables us to share those best practices. The Jockey Club, which I represent, has initiated and or funded several aftercare initiatives. Probably the best known is the Thoroughbred Aftercare Alliance, which accredits, inspects, and awards grants to approved aftercare organizations to retire, retrain, and rehome thoroughbreds using industry-wide funding. The Thoroughbred Incentive Program encourages the retraining of thoroughbreds into other disciplines upon the completion of careers in racing or breeding through sponsorships of thoroughbred-only classes and divisions, high-point thoroughbred awards at open horse shows and competitions, a Thoroughbred of the Year award, and a Young Rider of the Year award. The Jockey Club's Checkoff program enables owners and breeders to financially assist 5 charities by selecting an amount of their choice on the application for full registration form or during the payment process on our interactive registration. Thoroughbred Connect is a free online service designed to assist with placement of thoroughbreds following the conclusion of their racing or breeding careers. And a free microchip and tattoo lookup service we also offer, which helps equine rescue organizations identify thoroughbreds that may be at risk. So, a fairly new initiative that the Jockey Club is supporting that I'd like to discuss today is the Man o' War project, which was spearheaded by Jockey Club member, horse owner, and philanthropist, Ambassador Earl Mack. Although anecdotal evidence suggests that equine-assisted therapy benefits people with post-traumatic stress disorder, there's no clinical evidence to prove this. The Man of War Project is the first university-led research trial to determine the effectiveness of equine-assisted therapy and to establish guidelines for the application of equine-assisted therapy for veterans with PTSD. It may seem as if equine-assisted therapy programs are created to benefit humans, and they are, but they also benefit the horses. Many people believe thoroughbreds are ideal candidates for therapy programs, and these programs are the perfect second career for many of our retired equine athletes. Here's a video I'd like to share, created by the Jockey Club's America's Best Racing, which highlights the work ongoing with the Man of War Project.
The following is presented by the Man of War Project at Columbia University Irving Medical Center and the Earl Mack Foundation. Earl Mack is an Army veteran, the former ambassador to Finland under George W. Bush, and a longtime leader in thoroughbred racing and aftercare.
Well, the two things that I have great interest in and passion are a passion for our veterans that have given their lives to protect America, and we owe them a tremendous debt of thanks, and horses that have been my passion for over 50 years. So it was very easy to put horses and veterans together. Maybe that can help them.
He's also the founder of the Man of War Project at Columbia University Irving Medical Center.
The Man of War Project, as it is now, is a research project designed to determine if equine-assisted therapy is useful in treating PTSD in veterans.
It's the first university-led clinical research study of its kind.
If we can validate the equine-assisted therapy, it will be the first real treatment that's proven by peer review.
This is scientific rigor, seeking to turn anecdotal evidence into proven fact, relying upon research, studies, and clinical data.
This program is very innovative. In fact, it entails no direct talking about the trauma, which is very unique. Usually, interventions for PTSD entails either talking, speaking about the trauma, recounting the trauma, or medications. In this instance, there is no medications and no talking or direct talking about the trauma.
Once a week, over an 8-week period, veterans suffering from PTSD spend 90 minutes interacting with horses at the Bergen Equestrian Center in Leonia, New Jersey.
This is a way to address fear deficiencies, fear processing deficiencies in the brain in a very innovative way, not so much directly by medication or by speaking about the trauma, but really indirectly by enabling the patients to safely managing relations with an animal that initially they were very afraid of. And the same for the horse. We suppose that the way the horse can really give in and relax, throughout this interaction may be very beneficial for the veteran himself, kind of showing to the veteran that there is a way to interact which entails much less stress, much less fear, in a very safe way. And creating this safe zone, perhaps it's a very powerful experience.
Veterans learn to draw connections between what the horses, including retired racehorses, may be doing, thinking and feeling, and their own symptoms.
So horses seems to fit really what we are looking for. They are prey animals who are uniquely positioned to reflect what really veterans with PTSD feel. They are hypervigilant, they are often fearful, they are very sensitive to threat in the environment, very similar to a PTSD patient.
The quest is dual-purposed, not only to facilitate healing for the veterans, but also to prove the value of horses as the key instrument.
It's a very experiential treatment. Horses are very forgiving.
It's a great opportunity for retiring horses to do something which is very purposeful.
Veterans learn how their tone, actions, intentions, and expectations impact their relationship with the horses, and by extension, with the people in their lives.
A vet that comes and interacts with these horses is going to feel a certain sense of accomplishment if he can gain the respect of a horse.
Hopes are rising as the quest grows closer than ever to scientifically establishing the efficacy for PTSD treatment through equine therapy. This vital research will soon position the Man-O-War project at Columbia University Irving Medical Center's Equine Therapy PTSD Treatment Manual as the standard bearer around the nation, providing our veterans everywhere access to this vital alternative therapy.
I think everyone must find a purpose in their lives. And for me, right now, that is my main purpose in life.
It's been said that if you have a strong purpose in life, you don't have to be pushed. Your passion will drive you there. No one understands that better than Earl Mack.
To take care of these retired horses that I love so much, that have given me so much pleasure and joy. And as a veteran myself, to try to make sure that our wonderful heroes that have sacrificed their lives and then come back, to make sure they get the right treatment. And there's a treatment for them that's validated, and that's equine-assisted therapy. And give these vets a second chance.
'Cause nothing's gonna stop us. Nothing's gonna stop us. 'Cause these are our days. 'Cause these are our days.
We look forward to the results of that research, which we believe has the possibility of unlocking millions of dollars in government and private grants to aid these veterans, those that suffer from PTSD, and the horses. As you can see from the agenda and the panel crafted by the Asian Racing Conference and from the people who participated at the IFAR event, it's evident that thoroughbred aftercare has become a priority for many of us. And I'm pleased that aftercare truly has become a global effort. Harmonization is always a focus at our international events, and harmonization with regard to thoroughbred welfare would mean greater success for us all. I commend all the organizations that have devoted time, effort, and resources to the issue and to the International Forum for the Aftercare of Racehorses. Thank you for your attention.
Jim, thank you very much indeed. I'd like to invite Frances back onto the stage. We agreed that I do this because otherwise she'll be introducing herself. And there you go. There's the title of your presentation. Frances, back to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Adnan. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's fascinating to see what's happening there in America. You'll be interested to know that in New South Wales, Muswellbrook Prison, for many years in collaboration with Racing New South Wales, has run a program within the prison where prisoners work with horses. It's been extraordinarily effective in terms of rehabilitating prisoners and at the same time retraining horses. So it's a modest program, but something which is effective and could be done in another sphere and just as effectively. And wasn't it wonderful to see the passion of that man on that video that we just watched? I'm going to talk to you about some rules that we've introduced in Australia recently. But before I do that, I thought I'd just give you a brief introduction to the history of racing in Australia. The first meeting was held in Sydney's Hyde Park, which is now right in the middle of CBD, in October 1810. But it took 32 years before the first race club, the Australian Jockey Club, was set up. By then, the breeding sector for thoroughbreds was well and truly underway. And by 1843, races were being organised right across the nation, and the Australian stud book has been in continuous operation since 1878. In my state, South Australia, the first hurdle race was held in 1842, which was only a few years after the colony was settled. We don't have convicts in my state, we're all free settlers. So that historically was the genesis of a sport which today employs just short of 70,000 people across racing and breeding in an industry that contributes 8.3 billion to the Australian economy. That's not an insignificant number when you think we are a relatively small population. The significance of Australian racing is not proportionate to that small population. Today, over 80,000 Australians are involved in racehorse ownership. 18 billion was wagered last year, and we have iconic races. You will have seen the mention of the Melbourne Cup yesterday. Old and new iconic races. The Everest 2, which was only held last year for the first time, is also captivating the nation. Last year, more than 35,000 racehorses competed for $600 million in prize money in 19,235 races at 364 clubs located in metropolitan, regional and rural areas. And given that we are a big country, the tyranny of distance is extraordinary, and the small, tiny towns, for example, Penong, which is almost in the middle of the Nullarbor, right on the corner of Western Australia and South Australia, has 2 meetings a year, and they're very popular. We're very proud of the fact that Australian racing currently boasts Hugh Bowman and Winks as the world's leading jockey and racehorse on turf. Australia is also the largest centre of thoroughbred breeding outside the United States. And I'm very pleased to report that the keeper of the Australian Stud Book is able to indicate that the 2018 foal crop of more than 14,000 foals will be the first recorded increase since 2008, and that's strongly indicative of the health of Australian racing. Last year we exported 1,635 racehorses to 17 countries, including Korea, and our sales auction results continue to set new records, a trend which has continued right up until the present time. So you will see some breeding trends and some average yearling results on the screen there. Racing Australia, which is the organisation I chair, is the peak national body formed by and representing all the principal racing authorities in each Australian state and territory. Amongst other matters, which includes international engagement, Racing Australia is responsible for administering the Australian rules of racing, the integrity of thoroughbred breeding through the Australian Stud Book, and maintaining the ownership and identity information of thoroughbred horses racing in Australia or for export. The horse is integral to racing. In Australia, much time and effort is invested, and properly so, in integrity. The welfare of the horse is an aspect of integrity in the sport, and that includes welfare throughout its racing career and thereafter. If you take nothing else out of this presentation, take home that slide. It all starts with the horse. Like every other national racing authority, we understand that the growth, vibrancy and future of Australian racing cannot be taken for granted. We live in a digital world. We're exposed to small numbers of activists and extremists who seem to have nothing else to do but to get onto social media, and each one has about 1,000 fake profiles. But they do disseminate misinformation to the community. By way of example, one of the Melbourne newspapers before the Melbourne Cup last year published a statement that in Australia 18,000 racehorses are slaughtered each year. Now, it's absolute nonsense. To begin with, we don't breed that many. However, it is that sort of misinformation that we need to counteract. We know, as industry participants, that racehorses enjoy the highest standards of care and handling, but we must, in racing, communicate our values and welfare practices to the wider community. And Racing Australia has been working for some time on further welfare measures to do just this. In 2014, we introduced rules requiring owners and trainers to inform Racing Australia about the retirement of racehorses, the reasons for retirement and the destination of the horse. And it is an offence not to do it, and it is an offence to provide false information. Under those new rules, the managing owner of each racehorse is responsible for advising the reason for retirement and the plans for the horse beyond its racing career. The owner must indicate whether the racehorse was retired due to illness, injury, for breeding, at the owner's request, and whether the horse will be rehomed on another equestrian pursuit, go into an official retirement program, or be sent to a sale. We've also introduced a rule that the racehorse must retire at the age of 12 years, and that is enforced for all thoroughbred horses. The data collected through this policy enables Racing Australia to assemble facts around the retirement of racehorses which tell a good story, and the real story about our industry's commitment and the responsibility we have to our equine participants. We felt, however, that further reform was required. The fact that significant numbers of unnamed thoroughbreds were not regulated by any authority was unacceptable to my board. We recognised that traceability was just as important as integrity across our industry as it was to improving our welfare standards and outcomes. And as a result, in early 2015, Racing Australia embarked on what has been described as the most significant integrity and animal welfare reform in modern racing. And we led the world in that. We were guided by 4 principles: the transparency of the chain of ownership from the birth of a foal. Previously, only when a horse was registered to race was there any disclosure of ownership interests. And that process could take place when the horse was 2 years of age or older. This was unsatisfactory to racing authorities, which were charged with statutory responsibilities for maintaining integrity across the sport. Moreover, we believed that potential purchasers were entitled to know, by reference to an industry register, who had previously been the owner of a horse. This was particularly important where horses are sold by agents of undisclosed principals. Secondly, we were concerned with security of ownership interests which were not otherwise notified until a horse was registered with the Australian Stud Book. We considered it was unsatisfactory if owners were exposed to legal and insurance problems if sellers acted improperly or were bankrupt. Thirdly, we wanted some certainty of jurisdiction over owners prior to registration to race. We had a concern about enabling investigations as to improper conduct about racing by a horse's owner prior to registration, and that would be hindered if they were not subject to the rules of racing. Fourthly, the emerging threat of gene doping was very real. We recognised the growing risk posed by gene doping and the need for racing authorities to be able to detect perpetrators from the moment a horse was born. And that is a responsibility which breeders do not have, and they do not have the powers to police it. Any scandal in the thoroughbred industry would bring racing into disrepute, because breeding and racing are linked so closely. Racing Australia then set out working with racing and industry participants to clarify and introduce new rules relating to traceability, which ensured that from birth until retirement, as you can see on the screen there, the location and the ownership of Australian thoroughbred horses were recorded and known to Racing Authority. Rules were introduced making acceptance into the Australian Stud Book conditional on foals being registered within 30 days of birth and their beneficial owners being declared within another 60 days. That of course means that if you don't comply with those timelines, the horse will not be eligible in the Stud Book, nor will it be eligible to race, which is a stiff sort of sanction, but I'm pleased to say that we have compliance and it is working. So that enabled us to ensure that owners and breeders filing foal ownership declarations agreed to be bound by the rules of racing relating to welfare, traceability, the banning of anabolic steroids and prohibited substances prior to being registered for racing. It wasn't a particularly easy task. It's always difficult to introduce change. It's even more difficult to introduce it in racing. I think I still have some of the scars to prove it, but we did get there eventually. So those traceability reforms were introduced from the 1st of August 2016 in the breeding year that year, with more than 95% of declarations completed. the data we have collected is a powerful tool for racing to allow stewards and others charged with maintaining integrity to identify and verify quickly the whereabouts and, if necessary, the condition of every Australian thoroughbred, and to test for prohibited substances if they think it's appropriate. The keeper of the Australian Stud Book reports gratifyingly that this policy has provided confidence about her visibility across the 2016 foal crop. The retirement reforms have now been in place for 3 years, so we have a good ability to evaluate their effectiveness. They provide reliable and consistent facts about the post-career destinations of recently retired thoroughbred racehorses. And it's interesting that there is remarkable consistency across the results, which reveal at exit more than 65 horses went on to another area of equestrian pursuit: pleasure riding, show jumping, eventing, so forth. 20% were retired to the breeding sector, 9% were reported to have died. So if you look at that globally, nearly 9 out of 10 of Australian horses upon retirement adopted a different career, either in the breeding or the equestrian sector. And similar consistent results were revealed for the reasons of horses being retired. So, apart from anything else, it gives us knowledge of the drivers for racehorse retirement, which, if we use them effectively, can deepen understanding and aid in shaping policy responses. Data collected to date shows about 41% of racehorses are retired because of injury, which, as you know, doesn't mean they can't go on to another career. It may make them unsuitable for racing, but they can still perform meaningfully in other areas, or they can go into the breeding sector. Around 37% retired at the request of owners, and 9% retired for a specific decision to breed. We are confident that this data is not only reliable, but it's also robust, because each year every Australian principal racing authority undertakes an audit of the returns, and the feedback on those audits has been positive. So again, I repeat that under our rules of racing, it's an offence for anyone to provide inaccurate information on an official form. So there's never any certainty that any process captures everything, but we have received and analysed 27,000 formal returns, and we're certainly better informed now than before the policy was introduced. We have facts about the retirement of racehorses, which we can use to communicate positive stories to the wider community about our industry's commitment to equine welfare and refute some of the rubbish you hear from the extremists. And that, in a sense, comes back to what Winfred said on the first day, that one of our tasks is to engage and foster an emotional attachment between the race goer and the horse. The implementation of the policies we have adopted have provided us with information which gives us increasing understanding of our industry, the motivation of our participants. That helps us to maintain and improve integrity. It assists us to manage better industry operations, and it assists us to make future plans more effectively. We now have a store of facts and figures which can be used in communicating our integrity and equine welfare measures, and it gives us an ability to demonstrate and assure the wider community that the racing industries share their values, operate transparently and responsibly, and that we take our welfare obligations seriously. I think one of the major challenges we face is to build on the regulatory structure. One of the things we need to do is to make the thoroughbred relevant. We live in an increasingly urbanised society, and to engage people with the horse and with our sport, we have to start at the beginning and introduce children to horses. Now, you know, not every child can ride, and I'm not suggesting that, but to create that attachment, it's one thing to look after horses when they retire, but you have to respect the law of demand and supply. We can certainly retire horses to other careers, provided we are able at least to make the demand for the supply equal, and that means going back to the beginning. That has three particular positive aspects. First of all, it engages a young person with the sport. They are therefore more likely to go to a race meeting and enjoy it as a sport. Secondly, it encourages participants to become involved in the racing industry as strappers, track work riders, jockeys, trainers, whatever. And thirdly, it assists in creating a demand for the retired racehorse. Those of you who come from Australia would know the ballad of the man from Snowy River. A valuable colt by a valuable stallion called Regret had got away, and he'd joined the wild bush horses. And the man from Snowy River galloped in reckless fashion, courageously through unforgiving and scary terrain, cut out the colt from the wild horses and brought it back to the stable. Well, that wouldn't happen nowadays. The man from Snowy River nowadays would first of all boot up his GPS. He would then consult Google and find a company that specialised in dealing with wild bush horses, and he would send them an email for a quotation. After which he would take his partner out to dinner, because neither of them cook, and they live in a purpose-built house deliberately without a kitchen. And at the restaurant they would sit in silence, each of them texting other people on their mobile phones. And one of the challenges in racing is to remove people, albeit temporarily, from that lifestyle. Because what racing has to offer is real. You're dealing with real animals, real people. It's exciting, it's vibrant, and it isn't second-hand. You're right there in the middle of the action. That is the challenge. The message we have to deliver is we can offer you a better lifestyle, a more worthwhile and rewarding and more vibrant and exciting lifestyle. It's up to us now to deliver that message. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Dr. Sam Franklin is Associate Professor at the University of Adelaide. Sam, you're going to talk about the role of technological innovations in enhancing equine welfare and performance.
Thank you very much, and it's a real honour to be here today. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the ARC for inviting me to speak. So in my talk today, we're going to talk about the role of technological innovations in enhancing equine welfare and performance. And first of all, we'll have a little look at some of the technological advances in human sports science and how these technologies might then be applied to our equine athletes for assessing equine health and performance. So we'll look at some devices that are currently being used for monitoring training status and also for monitoring health status. And then finally, we'll look at some limitations of these technologies and some considerations for the future. So human sports science has actually made use of technology in informing training programs for many, many years. But over the last decade, there's been a move towards sensor-based wearable technologies. And these are now being routinely incorporated into the training of elite human athletes. And they're doing this for a number of reasons. Firstly, to optimize training and therefore ultimately to help to improve performance, but importantly to try and avoid fatigue, overtraining and injury. And of course, these are considerations that are very important to our equine athletes as well. Now, it's not just elite athletes that are making use of wearable technology. There are many, many devices that are now available in the mainstream, and I'm sure that many of you in the audience may have some of these devices, such as Fitbit or an Apple Watch. And there are a number of readily available apps that can be downloaded from your phone so that you can monitor your activity when you're exercising. These devices are even being marketed to children. In the middle here you see such a device that was being sold with Milo for children, and my 10-year-old son and all of his friends were all after one of these in Australia last year. And this is really just the beginning. It was estimated in 2016 that the wearable technology market was worth $6 billion US, and this is projected to be upwards of $25 billion by next year. The sector is advancing rapidly, and technology is progressing at huge speeds, and there are now devices such as you can see here, flexible patches and even implantable devices that are capable of monitoring a wide range of parameters, including anything from heart rate, respiratory rate, hydration, ECG, EMG, and activity. But what about our horses then? One of the important questions is, can we improve equine performance whilst minimizing injury rates? It's interesting if we look at the performance of our thoroughbred over the years and compare this to human athletes. And what you can see from this graph here is that over the past 50 years, there's not actually been any substantial improvement in the winning times of our thoroughbred racehorses. However, there has been a steady improvement in race times in human athletes, both in short distance running events and in longer distance, such as the marathon. Now, whether this is because we have selectively bred our thoroughbreds for our athletic performance and they've actually reached their limits, or whether there are other factors, such as training factors that might be implicated, it remains to be seen. It is interesting, however, if we look at the difference between thoroughbreds and standardbreds, we actually see that whilst thoroughbred race times haven't improved over the years, standardbred race times have. And there's possibly a number of reasons for this. First of all, there's likely to have been substantial improvements in some of the equipment used in standardbred harness racing, but also I think some of the standardbred trainers have been more ready to accept and utilize technology when training their horses. So compared to human sports science, equine exercise physiology is a relatively young discipline. And you can see that from this slide here, which charts the total number of publications over the years. And we see that really it's only been since the 1980s that there's been an interest in this field. But it is an increasing area of study, and we can see there's been an exponential increase in the number of publications over the past few decades. The early studies in horses and response to exercise were performed in the laboratory during treadmill exercise. And the image on the right here is of Sune Persson, who is widely regarded to be the grandfather of equine exercise physiology. And he did a lot of pioneering work back in the 70s and 80s in trotters in Sweden, looking at responses to exercise. Over the recent years, similar to in human there's been a move towards more field-based systems, and this is really reflecting the desire to look at horses in a real-world situation. And many of the technologies in human sports science are now being applied to horses, and these include in the monitoring of fitness and training status, as well as the monitoring of health status. So when we are monitoring training status, there are a number of things that can be and have been measured in horses, and these include heart rate, speed, blood lactate concentrations, oxygen consumption, and also gait assessment and stride parameters. So we'll have a look at some of these. Heart rate measurements have actually been applied to horses for quite a few years now, and there are several human devices that have been adapted for equine use. One of the first of these was the polar heart rate monitor, and these have been used actually in horses since the 1990s. But there are a number of other devices that are now available, including some that have been developed specifically for equine use. These heart rate monitors are generally combined with GPS data in order to give concurrent measurements of speed. And so the graphs that you can see here are sort of typical outputs. The one on the left there, this is some data from Polar system, and we can see heart rate in red plotted against speed in blue, and this horse is one that's exercising over 3 different bouts of exercise, 3 intervals of exercise of increasing intensity. We can now map this data also to Google Maps, and we can see exactly what's happening at any point on the track while the horse is exercising. So this can give us quite a lot of information. But it's really important that what we are measuring, or what we think we're measuring, is actually accurate. And one area that there hasn't been a huge amount of work in the peer-reviewed papers is on validation of these devices. I did find this poster, this is back from the 90s, which was one of the first actually looking to validate the Polar system, and they compared heart rate parameters from the system with ECG measurements. And at first glance, the data looks really encouraging, and there was a very strong correlation between the 2 measurements. But if we look a little bit more closely, it's a little bit concerning that that correlation is less at heart rates of above 200 beats per minute, because these are the sorts of heart rates that our horses are experiencing when they're exercising. More recently, there have been newer publications, and this one from 2010 was a little concerning. Again, they compared heart rate data with ECG measurements and found that there were considerable differences between the 2 devices, and suggested that it might not be possible for these 2 systems to be used interchangeably. So we do really need to be careful and make sure that we validate these techniques for use in horses. There are a number of factors that might influence the accuracy of heart rate monitors, and these include the types of the electrodes that are used, the positioning of electrodes on the horse's chest, movement artifact, which is very important in exercising horses. There can also be poor contact due to long hair coat or presence of dirt. And importantly, if we're using human devices, it's important to remember that many of the algorithms are based on humans and not on horses, so they may not be directly applicable to horses. Another parameter that's commonly measured in when we're assessing fitness in horses is the measurement of blood lactate concentrations. And this can be used as a measure of the aerobic capacity of the horse. And there are a number of handheld analyzers that are now available to do this. So these are very convenient. We just take a drop of blood and put them on the strip, and within a minute it gives us a recording or a measurement of the blood lactate levels. But again, these are human devices, and they've not all been validated for use in horses. Most of these devices actually measure plasma lactate rather than whole blood lactate, and they use algorithms, again, based on human physiology in order to calculate lactate concentrations. And we know that they have reduced accuracy when they're applied to horses when we've got high lactate concentrations and high PCV, so that's the concentration of red blood cells. The gold standard for measuring aerobic capacity, as we discussed in one of the talks yesterday relating to jockey performance, is the measurement of oxygen consumption. And this is one of the most commonly performed tests for assessing athletic performance in humans, and has also been applied in the laboratory setting to horses, as you can see in these images here. But again, there has been a move towards field-based systems for measurement of oxygen consumption. And there's a couple of devices that have been developed for use in horses over the past decade. But as you can see, these are pretty bulky, and I don't know that they're going to be widely applied in practice. They're probably more of a research tool. One area of particular interest is in gait assessment, and there are now several systems that have been developed that incorporate a number of measurements, including GPS, accelerometers, and gyroscopes, and also force sensors. And these can give us a lot of information about stride parameters, about stride frequency, stride length, stance times, and even the forces that are being exerted on the horse's limb during exercise. And these might be utilised to perhaps predict which horses might be better performers in terms of strategies used to increase speed, but also looking at the forces that are being exerted through the limb and the impacts that might have on injury, as we heard from Chris Whitten's talk yesterday. As in humans, there are a number of multi-parameter systems that are now becoming available for horse use, and these can be used in combination with apps, and data is now readily available to trainers and can be downloaded to their phones or tablets, and there's a large amount of data that can be collected from exercising horses. But we really need some more work to tell us what does all of this information mean. One of the really important areas for consideration of this technology is in monitoring the health status of the horse. And it's essential that we have early and accurate diagnosis of medical issues, including lameness, respiratory disease, cardiovascular disease, and other disorders that might impact a horse's performance, so that we can make early interventions and treat these horses at an early stage. Another area of real interest is whether we can actually predict at-risk horses that may be particularly at risk of developing catastrophic injury. And we heard about the exciting work that's been carried out by Chris Whitten's group yesterday. And hopefully by looking at some of these parameters, we might be able to ultimately reduce the incidence of exercise-related injuries in our horses. So again, there's a number of things that we can measure. For many years now, actually, heart rate and lactate responses have been used to indicate potential underlying medical issues. A lot of this work has been done, again, in standardbred horses, and this is some data from 1999, looking at changes in heart rate and lactate measurements within horses over time that might indicate that there's an underlying medical issue, such as lameness or a cardiorespiratory disorder. Now, of course, it's not specific, but it does give the trainer a heads up that there might be a problem and there's a need to investigate this further. Again, as I mentioned, gait analysis is an area of increasing interest, and a lot of work has been done over recent years to look at objective measures of lameness detection. And this is one of the devices that is being widely applied to horses now, making use of accelerometers to measure vertical displacements of the head and the pelvis in order to identify forelimb or hind limb lameness. And over the past few years, there's been a large amount of research validating these techniques. And as I said, they're now becoming widely utilized in the field of lameness detection, giving us an objective measurement of lameness. It is interesting, however, to consider the differences between asymmetry and lameness and what is the clinical significance of some of these findings. So there have been several studies just in the past 2 years that have used this technology in horses in training for a number of disciplines, including polo and other equine sporting disciplines, and looking at apparently healthy, sound horses that the riders have considered to be sound. And in fact, up to 75% of these horses have been found to have motion asymmetries of a similar magnitude to those examined and treated for lameness. So we really do need to do some further work to address some of these questions, such as, how the objective asymmetry scores can be translated into pain and orthopedic abnormalities, and really considering what the cutoff threshold should be. There's not been a huge amount of work looking at lameness detection in galloping horses, but this is a paper that was published just 2 years ago where they attempted to use these sensors on galloping horses with induced lameness. And they actually found that it wasn't possible to find any differences in any of the stride parameters measured at the gallop, whereas differences can be readily identified at the trot. So again, this is another area for future research. As well as musculoskeletal injury, disorders of the respiratory system are also common in our racehorses. And racehorses are at particular risk of developing upper airway collapse during strenuous exercise. And this ultimately will reduce airflow and oxygen delivery to the exercising muscles. So the reason that horses are particularly prone is that, unlike us, horses only breathe through their nose, and this means that the areas at the back of the throat during strenuous exercise are put under a large amount of pressure, which puts them at risk of collapsing. Now, in the past, we have examined horses at rest, but really many of these horses, when we look at them at rest, look entirely normal. And it's only under the pressures of strenuous exercise that we start to see this collapse. And so one of the recent advances in the last decade has been the development of overground endoscopy in order to actually observe the airways while the horse is exercising. So this involves the use of an endoscope or a small camera that's positioned at the back of the horse's throat while it's exercising. And it allows us to diagnose dynamic airway collapse. And the picture you see on the right there is of some of the first testing we did back in 2005, actually. This is the device that we developed in the UK with funding from the Horse Race Betty Levy board. And it is really now considered to be the gold standard method for diagnosing upper airway disorders in horses. And now that we can accurately diagnose these problems, that will inform our treatment decisions. We can also use this technology to assess the impact of the rider and any tack modifications, as well as head and neck position on upper airway function, and importantly, to assess the efficacy of any treatments we put in place. So for those of you who haven't seen what a horse's throat looks like when it's exercising, this top picture is what things should look like. We're here looking at the larynx of the horse, and you can see it's wide open to allow as much air to flow down to the lungs as possible. But there are a number of problems that horses develop. These include dorsal displacement of the soft palates that we can see here, and laryngeal collapse that have a considerable impact on the airway. Another area of interest is in cardiac assessment. Now, cardiac disorders are less common than musculoskeletal and respiratory disorders, but they can have absolute devastating consequences for both the horse and also the jockey if horses collapse and die during races. And when this occurs in high-profile races, such as in the Melbourne Cup here, this also has an important impact on the public perception of racing. So what we want to be able to do is to try and identify those horses that are at risk of collapse before they actually drop down dead. And there's a number of devices that are now being used. We can use exercising electrocardiography to investigate the presence of exercise-induced arrhythmias. So at the bottom you can see here an ECG trace from a horse, and we've got some nasty-looking complexes here that could potentially trigger a horse to collapse. There are, of course, it's not always straightforward, and can be difficulties interpreting data, especially at high heart rates. Horses' maximal heart rate when it's galloping is up to 240 beats per minute. Also, we commonly get artifacts during exercise due to movement, if we lose electrodes or they become loose, and that can make things difficult. So it's not always straightforward, as you can see in the bottom trace here. Other technologies that are being adapted from the human world include devices such as the AliveCore phone-based system, which has been developed for humans. And this includes a couple of electrodes that are positioned on the outside of the phone. And we put these against the chest wall of the horse. And this allows us to make a rapid assessment of cardiac rhythm, and is particularly useful after the race, and is being used in some of the racing jurisdictions currently in Australia and also elsewhere in the world. In future, it's possible that implantable ECG recorders might be useful for longer-term monitoring, and these devices are already being used in humans and can monitor electrical activity of the heart for up to 3 years. And the first of these devices has actually been implanted into a horse by a group in Denmark just this last year. So this might be an application for the future. Lastly then, I'll also mention monitoring of body temperature. So there was quite a lot of work in this in the run-up to the Atlanta Olympics back in the 1990s. And since then, really, there hasn't been much further interest, but there has been gaining interest over the past few years. Of course, in this part of the world and in Australia, horses are often exercising in hot and humid conditions, and this puts them at risk of exertional heat illness. Also, horses may be travelling long distances, both within the country, such as large countries as Australia, but also internationally. And they are at risk of developing illness associated with travel. So it's important that we can identify increases in temperature at an early stage so that we can intervene in these cases. And there are a number of technologies that are currently being developed for use in humans and adapted for use in horses. These include a gastrointestinal pill that measures core body temperature, and also infrared technology that can measure surface temperature. We've also got disposable sensors that can be attached underneath the tail and send information again to your tablet or to your telephone to give you real-time monitoring of temperature of horses. The last image on the right there is actually another application of infrared thermography, and this is now being used to assess welfare in a number of animals species, and it's been shown that alterations in eye temperature might be indicative of stress, and this technology has started to be used to assess equine welfare as well as other production animals. So as we can see, there are many different devices that are available and are being applied to our horses, but there are some limitations. And many of the issues are the same for humans and our equine athletes. So despite the increasing popularity of many of these wearable technologies, very few of these devices have actually received independent and rigorous testing to assess their accuracy, reliability, and validity. And this is essential that we do this moving forward. Other limitations include movement artifacts, and as we've seen, this is important in our galloping horses. The frequency of data sampling that is required at those speeds that horses are galloping, 70 kilometers an hour. The number of variables that can be monitored are obviously less than in the laboratory, but these are increasing. And as we've seen, there is still some uncertainty regarding data interpretation. So lastly, but not leastly, some other important considerations when we're looking at data collection is related to the ownership of the data. Who owns this data? There are potentially confidentiality issues between a veterinarian and the client, and what of this information should be made available to regulators in order to make decisions whether to pull horses from races, for example, and even to the general public when they're making decisions about which horses to bet on. Data storage and security has also been highlighted as an issue in human athletes and will inevitably be an issue for our equine athletes as well, and is going to be a very important issue to consider in the future. So just to conclude then, as we've seen, there's a wide range of technologies that are now available and have the potential to assist in the monitoring and training of the training load of horses, and also prevention of sport-related injury and illness. But it's essential that we have appropriate scientific evaluation of these devices before they become widely adopted. And this, of course, is going to require significant funding. And last but not least, as I mentioned, data privacy is going to be an important consideration. Thank you very much for your attention.
Dr. Franklin, thank you very much indeed. I'll be interested to know how artificial intelligence can be used to look at all of that data that you're looking at, because of course cognitive capture is the word that they're using about artificial intelligence. The most common application of AI at the moment is to look at unstructured data and find patterns within that, and surely that will also help in your work. So the next two presentations come from the Hong Kong Jockey Club, and they're a variation on kind of a similar theme. So Peter Curl, Peter, if you want to come to the podium. Peter is Executive Manager of Veterinary Regulation at the Hong Kong Jockey Club, and both he and Amanda, who's going to follow, are going to talk about the club's equine welfare strategy. Over to you.
Thank you very much. Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to speak with you here today at the Asian Racing Conference. It's an honor and a privilege. This morning I'm going to just briefly discuss a few of the welfare challenges facing the horse racing industry globally, and to briefly outline the Hong Kong Jockey Club's welfare strategy that is aimed at proactively addressing and managing some of these challenges. Enhancing the quality of life, welfare, safety and durability of the racehorse is absolutely critical to ensuring the popularity and sustainability of racing into the future. The fact is, the vast majority of racehorses are provided with a very high standard of husbandry and veterinary care, and indeed, this is a fundamental requirement for optimal athletic performance. Those outside racing, however, would argue that this is very much contractual, that so long as horses provide, we'll provide for them. They would argue that it's a very one-sided contract, that it's in the owner and trainer's best interest to provide for the optimal care of the horse to ensure that it performs at its best. And so long as the horse delivers on its side of the contract, we'll deliver the good treatment to that horse. Conversely, they would argue that once that performance declines, so too does the care or interest in that horse's welfare. Society is definitely in the midst of a major cultural revolution regarding how animals are viewed and how they should be treated in the course of human use. And this is especially true when that use is for sport, for wagering or entertainment. And we'll see evidence of this, this cultural revolution in the decline of the acceptance of sports such as bullfighting, in the decline of interest in using animals in circuses, the ever-increasing consumer concern over how animals are raised, how they're cared for, how they're transported, and how they're killed for human consumption. And this sensibility, of course, extends to racing sports, whether that be jumping races or flat races. So, rapidly changing societal values have resulted in horse welfare becoming a critical or even existential issue for racing authorities, with industry facing increasing scrutiny and opposition to its very existence in some parts of the world. Campaigns waged against racing have definitely damaged the image of racing, especially amongst the casual racegoer or the potential customer. Internationally, animal activism is more sophisticated, and with the use of social media platforms, it's instantaneous, it's far-reaching, and it's essentially cost-free. We're all familiar with these very graphic, very confrontational, and very professional anti-racing campaigns. So the social licenses of the racing industry are under pressure in a number of countries, with the prospect of government intervention a very realistic possibility, especially if the industry is seen to be unwilling or unable to adequately address welfare to the satisfaction of society. The racing industry worldwide must be seen to achieve a change from the traditional culture of racehorse management to one which ensures that the care provided for the racehorse during all stages of its life cycle is genuinely and demonstrably consistent with the philosophy that the horse is the centre of the industry and that its welfare is of paramount concern to all participants. The Hong Kong Jockey Club, through its existing welfare safeguards, its exceptional level of veterinary and farriery care, and its enormous contribution to society, could be regarded to have relatively secure social license. But irrespective of this, management has decided to continuously monitor the welfare outcomes for Hong Kong horses and to examine where improvements can be made. This is necessary to maintain our well-earned international reputation, to secure business sustainability, and also, and most importantly, because it's definitely the right thing to do. So it's our mission at the Jockey Club to deliver an environment, to deliver policies and regulation that ensures as far as possible horses trained and raced at the Hong Kong Jockey Club are healthy, they're happy, and they're cared for in a manner that is consistent with their status as a centerpiece of our racing industry. And we aim to do this guided by pragmatic animal welfare philosophies. I will just step you through very briefly the 8 key components of our coordinated welfare strategy. To start with, we've established 2 dedicated positions, a welfare manager and a welfare officer, and I feel that this demonstrates the club's commitment at the outset to equine welfare. So these 2 positions are responsible for the strategy and policy development and for the delivery of equine welfare initiatives. Secondly, we aim to develop equine welfare advisory panels, an internal and an external advisory panel. Seem to have, an internal and an external advisory panel. So the internal panel comprises of the welfare manager and officer, clinical veterinarians from the club, and a project manager. So they will primarily be tasked with developing comprehensive welfare strategies. I don't know what's happened here. Okay, there we go. They will be tasked with developing comprehensive welfare strategies and implementing specific action plans, such as welfare standards, auditing systems, and industry and public education programs. We have an expert panel that we aim to develop comprised of specialists and experts in their relevant fields that will advise the club on the formulation and refinements of existing rules and regulations, and also assist the internal working group with regards to the strategy itself. Now, often the physical and psychological damage that can be suffered by horses in training is caused by ignorance and an adherence to outdated traditional practices rather than deliberate abuse or carelessness. So we need to develop and aim to develop systems that investigate and determine the root causes of conditions or outcomes that may adversely affect the health and welfare and durability of our racehorses. We want to look for associations between practices and welfare outcomes so that we can better identify horses at risk or at risk of injury or compromised welfare during training or racing. And we want to use this information to promote an evidence and science-based approach to training and the care of horses in Hong Kong specific to our environment. And this leads on nicely to equine research. There are many conditions that adversely affect the welfare and durability of racehorses that are still not very well understood. By contributing to injury rates, high attrition rates, reducing field sizes, and causing inconsistent racing performances, such conditions definitely impact on the welfare and safety of the horse and the financial viability and satisfaction of horse ownership. They also affect the appeal of racing as a wagering product. The only means of potentially reducing the economic and welfare effects of such conditions is for scientists to undertake quality research in an effort to understand the nature of these problems and thereby develop means to reduce their impacts. So we aim to develop a research-based approach to problem solving, which is essential for any modern industry, whether it's biological or technological. Now, it'll come as no surprise to you that all of these industries have a massive research and development budget. And this should be considered an essential business expense for the racing industry as well. To neglect to find science-based solutions to problems that impact the occupational health and safety of horses and the safety and quality of life of horses, and which have a significant risk of causing reputational damage, is not good business practice. So we aim to commit to further research that is targeted, that is racing relevant, and that is coordinated. And a very important part of this, no doubt, is the establishment of a confidential international collating centre or an international injury database, which is something that was touched upon by Professor Parkin yesterday. This will allow for the reliable comparisons between jurisdictions and for significant improvements in preemptive injury detection and prevention. Racing does a lot of good things to protect and safeguard the welfare of horses. It's just that we're not very good at communicating that to society. This ineffective communication and failure to be proactive in welfare messaging has ceded control of the public debate to animal rights activists, which has meant that misleading claims may be accepted as facts by society. So, as part of our strategy, we aim to be more proactive in our welfare messaging, and primarily this is to address the misleading claims of anti-racing groups that may be out there. We want to document and actively promote examples of our current good practice and performance in animal welfare. And we want to prepare policy statements on key issues for general media information and education. Furthermore, we aim to prepare and deliver learning materials, including seminars for internal and external education, to instill a culture that genuinely places the welfare of the horse as a primary concern within every member of the club, whether they be in management, whether they be a jockey, a trainer, or a stable staff member. We aim to have everyone an advocate of horse welfare. Another key component of our strategy is most definitely education programs. Racehorse trainers are required to know and have experience in exercise physiology, in husbandry, in nutrition, in veterinary science, and a whole host of regulatory controls. Despite this, no professional in a comparable field is allowed to practice without first obtaining a basic qualification and subsequently agreeing to complete ongoing or continued education. So you could ask yourself why horse trainers, whose decisions very much affect the welfare and potentially the lives of horses and jockeys, should be any different. Well, we don't think that they should be. We think, and because of this, we aim to develop and implement a system of mandatory continued education for trainers and assistant trainers in Hong Kong. And you'll often hear trainers say that owners don't really understand or are ignorant to the limitations of flesh and blood of a horse, and that they expect them to perform like motorbikes. So for this reason, we're looking to implement voluntary education programs for racehorse owners and to provide information on basic exercise physiology and on veterinary and regulatory matters, including equine welfare. As has been discussed throughout the week, the aftercare of racehorses is a key part of our strategy. The aftercare of retired horses is probably the most challenging and potentially the most expensive component of any welfare strategy. When ex-racehorses are physically sound, attractive and of good temperament, it's generally not difficult to retrain and place them as equestrian horses. So for this reason, we hope that this strategy and the steps outlined in this strategy will help to encourage systems of husbandry, of conditioning and veterinary care that will minimise the proportion of horses that retire with conditions that render them unsuitable or significantly compromised for future careers. And it is hoped that the Chungfa Training Centre in mainland China will assist us in this, with improved training and spelling facilities in addition to a rehabilitation unit. This will afford club horses suffering occupational injuries with a better chance for rest, rehabilitation, and a career after racing. The club has a long-established system of retraining in place that Amanda will speak about after me, and an import permit structure that actively promotes and financially supports the export of horses overseas for retirement. Nevertheless, it'll become an important part of our welfare strategy to improve upon these initiatives and further explore additional retirement options for the club. The last point is the development of key performance indicators. The club's veterinary departments are looking to develop measurable racehorse welfare key performance indicators and to devise auditing and reporting systems based on these KPIs. This will not only enable us to measure the performance of our existing welfare strategies and gauge this, but also to gauge the success of any new welfare initiatives. Furthermore, it will allow us to demonstrate to the skeptical observer evidence of our high standards of equine welfare at the club. This has just been a very brief introduction to our welfare strategy. We believe that the successful implementation of these initiatives has the very real potential to improve the durability of racehorses, to decrease the prevalence of disappointing racing performances, and to enhance the horse ownership experience and increase the proportion of racehorses that retire in a suitable condition to undertake further careers. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Peter. Let's continue with the perspective of the Hong Kong Jockey Club. Amanda Bond is the Executive Manager of Equestrian Affairs at the club. Amanda.
Thank you, Adnan. Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. And to begin with, I'd like to thank our very generous hosts, the Korean Racing Authority. And I'm thrilled to be able to be given this chance to speak with you. And I'm going to follow on from Peter's talk and talk specifically about the Hong Kong Jockey Club's work with the aftercare of racehorses. If we can get the slides to work. Now, currently in Hong Kong, there's a population of around 1,200 racehorses, and each year around 400 to 450 retire from the sport. Now, before we go any further, it's important to understand the challenges that face Hong Kong in terms of keeping horses. And that challenge is space. Welcome to Hong Kong. where our landmass totals just over 400 square miles. That's 10 times smaller than the island of Jamaica. However, 75% of that land is underdeveloped because it's mountainous or forests. And this results in around 6,500 people per square kilometre. And compare that with 3.1 people per square kilometre in Australia. That makes us the fourth most densely populated region in the world. And there's huge pressure on the government in Hong Kong due to housing shortages, where some people live in apartments as small as car parking spaces. So what does this mean for horses retiring from racing? It means that not all of them can remain in Hong Kong. So when owners retire their horses, they're given a choice. And they can either export their horse and make their own private arrangements, which is the norm in many racing jurisdictions. But what we've also offered is that they can donate their horse to the horse to the club, and we'll take over the responsibility and the welfare and care of that horse for the remainder of its life. And this forms the basis of the club's retired racehorse program. Now, the club have been caring for retired racehorse for decades. Issues with finding good outcomes for horses is nothing new. And in 1940, we established the Bees River Equestrian Centre. Now, unfortunately, the war got in the way, so its role as a home for retired horses was delayed until the 1960s. And today, the centre houses just over 250 horses, and approximately 150 horses pass through the centre every year through our rehabilitation and retraining programme. The centre also doubles as our national equestrian centre, offering national and international horse shows, as well as a busy riding school and livery yard. Now, the retraining programme is staffed by 27 dedicated staff, plus a team of specialist vets and farriers who care for all the equestrian horses in Hong Kong. There are 6 riders in total. 2 of them are track work riders who help with the starting of the horses, particularly when they're adjusting to their new environment and they're still a little bit wild. And we then have 4 specialist equestrian riders who train the horses on. However, retired horses in Hong Kong are supported by the club's wider equestrian department, with over 200 staff working across 4 equestrian schools. Now, one question I'm asked whenever I speak about the program is, how much does it all cost? Well, in our last full financial year, the operating costs of the program totaled 36.7 million Hong Kong dollars, equivalent to around 4.6 million US. However, this is offset by income, and I'll come on to that in a second. So the resulting cost to the club was 12.7 million Hong Kong dollars, or 1.6 million US. So coming on to income, the costs of the program are offset through a subsidy levied on all owners when they first import a racehorse into Hong Kong. And this system was first introduced in 2003. And currently, an owner pays 60,000 Hong Kong dollars per horse. Now, on retirement, if the owner chooses to export their horse, they're reimbursed all of that money and it pays towards the cost of shipping. However, if they decide to donate their horse to the club, we then retain the subsidy and it helps covers the cost of the program. But as you saw in the previous slide, it still doesn't cover all of the costs, and for this reason, we'll be increasing that subsidy to 80,000 Hong Kong next year. And when this happens, the program will be much closer to being self-financing. Now, when an owner makes a decision to retire a horse, or whether or not to donate it to the club, the horse undergoes a veterinary assessment. And this is very important because this makes sure that they're physically fit, and it's in the best interest of the horse's welfare to enter the proposed route. Now, it is a sad fact of life that sometimes it is in the best interest of the horse, and it's the kindest thing to do to euthanize him. And we must never be afraid of this decision if it's the right decision. So our vets are involved in every stage of the process, regularly assessing the horses all through rehabilitation and retraining to make sure that welfare is never compromised. Now, the retraining process takes between 3 to 9 months, depending on the temperament of the horse, the physical condition, and its ability. And they're just like people. Some learn quicker than others, and some are more willing to learn. We start off with a period of adjustment where the horses need to adapt to their new environments, we change their diets, and generally they have to switch off from the mindset that running as quickly as possible is actually what we want. And during this time, we closely assess them and treat any injuries that we may have. Now, this period can take sometimes just a few days, or it can take a few weeks. That is then followed by a process called restarting, where we have to build up a different kind of strength, because equestrian activity has a horse work in a different shape. They also have to learn how to bend and make circles, so we often actually start the horses by working them from the ground. The horses also have to get used to being ridden in the equestrian style, with the rider's leg down and around the horse. Then once the basics are established, we then continue with their development, building their suppleness, their flexibility, and their strength. And we also educate them in basic dressage movements and introduce jumping small fences. And as I said, this takes 3 to 9 months, after which the horses are then rehomed and they're passed into their new destinations. But the work doesn't end there. Further training always continues, and those of you that know horses will know that stage 4 never ends, because horses never stop learning and developing. And throughout the process, the horses are monitored by a specialist team, and once a month we hold a formal assessment where we see all the horses in the system. And for the new arrivals, this is often a chance for us to assess them and form an idea of their potential. And then for the more advanced ones, we determine their final outcome. And this regular assessment means that we can adjust the horse's training and, if needed, tailor it to its final use. And we use all of our resources within the equestrian department, bringing together our senior instructors, our riders, and our vets to form a decision on a horse's progress. Now, we're extremely lucky in Hong Kong that we're able to take this holistic approach to the care of the horse. Our riders work closely with vets and farriers, but also a saddler and a physio, all of the people who are needed to prepare a horse for his new activity. But retired racehorses, of course, bring their challenges. Just like retiring human athletes, their athletic performance causes wear and tear. And I'm sure wear on joints, tendons, ligaments is common around the world. But with careful management, horses can return to meaningful second careers. Now, thoroughbreds have notoriously poor quality feet and flat feet, which can be prone to bruising. So our vets and farriers work closely together to address any issues, and we also use specialist shoeing wherever necessary. And one problem particular to Hong Kong relating to our hot and humid climate is a condition called anhydrosis, or dry coat. And this is where a horse loses the ability to sweat, and therefore he can't control his body temperature. And for these horses, we either have to limit their athletic work, or in the most ideal cases, we export them to more suitable climates. Now, one of the successes of any retraining program is having a diverse range of options for the final destination for the horses in their second careers. And at the Hong Kong Jockey Club, we're limited by space and the size and scale of our equestrian industry. We have space for just over 500 equestrian horses, and we have only 2,000 regular riders. But nevertheless, we still rehome a large number of our horses in our equestrian industry in Hong Kong. We provide horses to members of the Jockey Club who wish to have a livery horse, and they might use those horses for their own personal use, either for pleasure or for competition. We also provide a number of horses to our riding schools in Hong Kong, and those horses being used in riding lessons. And I'll talk some more on that in a minute. A number of horses return back to racing, but in a support capacity. They may help the next generation of jockeys, track work riders, and grooms, as we heard from Amy yesterday about the Apprentice Jockey School. or they may act as lead horses. Now, a small number of our horses show the potential to be top-class sport horses, and these are either kept in Hong Kong or sent overseas to be prepared for higher-level competition. And lastly, due to the restrictions of space and the challenges previously outlined, we do have to export some of our horses overseas. And this can be because they need extended periods of time for recovery from injury, or because they're dry coat, or because temperamentally they're not suited to Hong Kong with a lack of space or a lack of ability to turn them out to pasture. And to help with this, we've established some key partnerships in both New Zealand and USA, where we engage approved organizations to retrain and rehome these horses. And the cost of shipping, the care of the horse, and the retraining cost is covered by the Hong Kong Jockey Club. Now, I mentioned our riding schools, and they provide a hugely valuable outlet for our horses. And the club has 4 riding schools in Hong Kong, and as you can see from this slide, a large proportion of the horses working in those schools are ex-race horses. In fact, in the main, ex-race horses are the only horses used in those riding schools, because the remaining stock are ponies that are used to teach children to ride. We then also work with riding schools in Hong Kong not owned by the club, and that's a good home for our horses, but for them, it's also a valuable supply of free horses. And the riding schools offer a wonderful way in which we can engage with the community and help instill that love of the horse that we've identified is really important. And as part of our charitable work, we provide subsidized riding, making equestrian sport accessible to all. Last year, we catered for 28,000 lesson attendees and almost 100,000 people engaged in some form of equestrian activity organized by the club. Now, these numbers may not seem big to the larger nations, but when you consider that we have only 400 members of our Equestrian Federation, the numbers start to become impressive. We are, though, victims of our own success, as we currently have a waiting list of 12,000 people who want to access riding lessons. And with the limitations on space, it remains difficult to find land to build more schools or to house more horses and ponies. Now, I want to share with you a couple of case studies which I think really illustrate the success of our retraining program and show how it can be win-win, both for the horse and for the equestrian industry. So my first is Noble Boss, or Nibbles as we know him. And this is a son of Sadler's Wells, and he raced 4 seasons in Hong Kong. He won once, and he retired in 2007. And then Nibbles went into the retraining program, and he became a riding school horse at Toon Moon Public Riding School. Now, it turned out that Nibbles had quite a talent for show jumping. So he was then passed on to one of Hong Kong's junior riders, and she competed him. And I'm very happy to say that this is Nibbles just 3 weeks ago, where he competed in an international show jumping Grand Prix, and he was placed second at the age of 18 years old. And I'm even more happy to say that Nibbles is now going to be exported to the UK for paddock retirement and to live out the rest of his days in a very happy state. Our next example is Marshall King, or AKA Ninja. Now, he raced in England and Ireland before coming to Hong Kong, where he ran just 8 races in 1 season. And he retired to us aged just 5. Now, we spotted the potential of this horse from the early set, and we felt that he had a talent for eventing. So we shipped him to England, where the club manages the senior equestrian team, and he was given to Annie Ho. And Annie is a long-standing member of Team Hong Kong, so she was perfectly placed to produce Ninja, and he is now undertaking a very successful eventing career in the UK. And just to show that the retired horse is suitable for all of the Olympic equestrian disciplines, this is Precision Era. And he's another one who retired in 2014, having raced 2 seasons. After retraining, he became a riding school horse at Lei Yue Moon. And he now works regularly in the school, but he's also being trained as a dressage horse. And this is him, a couple of weeks ago, winning a medium-level dressage competition. And he's turning out to be a very smart boy. So these examples show how the retired horse can play a vital part in the development of an equestrian industry, and in our case, that ongoing development of the industry. Because if it were not for racing, Hong Kong would not have staged the Olympic and Paralympic Games of the 2008 Beijing Games. And these games fueled a passion for the sport in Hong Kong, which we've been able to build on ever since. Without our retired horses, it would not be possible to teach people to ride. It would not be possible to hold competitions, or develop equestrian teams, or participate on the world stage. We're also very proud that we've been able to help our friends in mainland China by providing horses to help them in the growth and development of their equestrian industry. So to finish, I want to reflect a little bit on the words of Diana Cooper from Godolphin in her presentation on Monday, and it's also been echoed this morning. And that is that we need to promote what we do with our retired racehorse programs and use the many, many positive stories that we have to counteract that negative media that we get sometimes when retired racehorses end up in poor situations. Now, we've started this in Hong Kong, holding regular community events promoting equestrian sport, promoting the use of the thoroughbred, and connecting public with direct access to the horse. And these pictures are from one event that we hold every year in Shotton Racecourse. And in 1 year, 45,000 visitors attended over 3 days, coming to see the ex-racehorses performing in jumping, dressage, and eventing. And hopefully, instilling this love in the horse amongst the general public in Hong Kong will help future generations to appreciate the beauty and ability of the horse, and hopefully develop them into racing fans of the future. So finally, I'd like to thank those of you that are involved in the dedicated work on the International Forum for the Aftercare of Racehorses. This is a wonderful initiative, as the more we can share our ideas and our expertise, the better. But there is much work left to do. Horse welfare is a vital component of keeping racing successful. And aftercare of racehorses is a fundamental part of horse welfare. We cannot ignore it, and we cannot afford to get it wrong. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Amanda. So now let's get the view of our host nation, Dr. Kyungwon Park, as Chief Manager of Vet Regulation at the Korea Racing Authority's Equine Hospital. Doctor, the podium is yours.
Thank you for your introduction. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Before talking about the horse welfare, I'd like to speak about our health. Usually, the frequent smile and neck exercise do for your physical and mental health, especially after looking at the screen as this manner or at this manner for 2 hours. Please give your smile to your left and right person, and smile to the heaven, and smile to the earth. Then, smile to the outstanding speakers here. Thank you. First of all, it's my great honor to be here as a speaker on this ARF session. I'd like to express my deep appreciation to the ARF organizing committee, especially to Mr. Engelbrecht Breskas and the president of KRA, Mr. Kim. Let me start. Today, my topic is a new start for the promotion of horse welfare in Korea. I'll briefly talk about the principles of animal welfare, the recent issues and related acts, some specialties in horse welfare, the new strategic plans of Kerry, and my conclusion. This is a historical wall painting in the tomb of Goguryeo dynasty dating back to 4th centuries AD. You can find several hunters on the horseback chasing wild animals such as deer, mountain pigs, and even tigers, shooting arrows forward and backward. The riders are not just hunters. They are thought to be some kinds of leaders or martial apprentices on training. By the histories of the ancient Korea, Goguryeo and Silla managed the educational system for the young students and prospective leaders. That is called 조위선인 or 화랑, respectively. To be leaders, they were taught history, reading, writing, physical and mental training, battle strategies, ethics, etc. The representative 5 rules of 화랑 was as follows. First, keep loyalty to the Lord. Second, keep respect and politeness to the parents. Third, keep credit to the friends and fellows. Fourth, never retreat or run away at the battles. Fifth, kill live things with selection. Let's focus on the fifth, selective killing. It means not killing any pregnant females, males with newborn foals, birds on hatching, or sick ones. Even in killing, they were taught to do it as quickly as possible, using only one shot. That rule was inherited into the hunter's rule until now. I think this is one of the very basic ideas on animal welfare. In 1979, Farm Animal Welfare Council of Great Britain suggested 5 principles or 5 freedoms of animals, mainly focusing on the industrial livestock ones. Those are freedom from starving and thirsty, freedom from discomfort, freedom from pain, injuries, and diseases, freedom for normal behaviors, and freedom from stress and fear. Interestingly, Welfare Quality Project was developed to safeguard well-being status of the farm animals in Europe. 4 principles are used to determine the status of welfare scientifically. Those are good stable environment, good health, suitable behaviors and treatment, and good feed. 12 guidelines were set up to evaluate the status of animal welfare and as 3 guidelines for each principle. The important thing is that these guidelines should be considered from the animal side, not from the human side. I made this simplified graph to help understand the aims of animal welfare. Comparing to human welfare, the aim of animal welfare is to improve it from the cruelty and abuse to normal or balanced status. Then to increase the happiness or make balance to the human. At the first day of animal welfare session, At the first day of animal welfare session, Miss Erin Craddy, Executive Director of the Thoroughbred Charities of America, introduced a very interesting motto, horses first. I think it's a very good and effective motto to deliver the aims of TCA, but it also tells that horses are not first yet. Because if horses were the first, we don't have to say horses first. The most frequent question on animal welfare is, why animals now? There are so many human welfare issues, including abuses or cruelties. In my opinion, animals are not the same as humans, but they are the precious lives and closely related with our lives too. So we should pay attention to treat them as they deserve to be. Here I introduce some issues on animal welfare in Korea. In 2012, a dolphin Jedori was decided to be released home. Jedori had been accidentally captured from the coast several years before, then used as a show dolphin at Seoul Grand Zoo, just next to Seoul race course. After it, more dolphins were returned to the sea. Some follow-ups shows that most of them are adapting well. Also in 2012, the horse-drawn carriage for the tourist was stopped operating in Seoul. Actually, the management and body condition of the horses was poor, so that decision had good reasons to do. But is it a correct solution in general? Last March, a tragic accident happened. 3 young firewomen were sacrificed while rescuing a discarded dog aside the road. The dog was tied at the fence without the owner or anyone responsible. One spectator called to 119. When the firemen arrived at the place, they stopped the truck by the road and tried to rescue the dog. Unfortunately, another truck made a terrible accident. Do they right things or not? This is a book titled as a lawsuit on the right to live as a real hen. It's kind of favorable on the stories about 6 subjective animals which are thought to be abused. Those are egg-producing hen with a beak broken intentionally, discarded street dog to be euthanized, experimental rabbit for toxicity test, fur-producing mink, captured polar bear dreaming home, and racehorse, leg of rest. I don't think I need to explain them more. Most of the stories are true, but some debates remain. The author of the book contacted me first in 2013. And she explained her concerns on animal welfare and her plan to write the book. At first, she had a somewhat skewed view on the racehorse. After meeting and making discussions with me, she got to understand how horses' lives are and modified her stories of the racehorse in more positive ways. Also, she asked me to review her stories shortly before publishing it in 2014. When the book was published, she gave me a gift of the book. So I bought 10 more books for my fellows. In many cases, some animal welfare issues are based on misunderstandings, prejudice, or lack of exact information. That's why we need continual education. In Korea, Act of Animal Protection was established in 1992. It is purpose to prevent animal abuse, safeguard and improve animal welfare, to contribute to the healthy and responsible society of harmonized coexistence of humans and animals, to educate dignity of life of animal and help people equipped with good emotions. It's very long to describe. But simply speaking, the law aims to make our world good with the animals. But unfortunately, there's no special consideration on the horse. Interestingly, Korea made a paramount law, Act of Horse Industry Promotion, in 2011. But it did not pay much attention on the horse welfare too. We must consider some special things in the horse welfare. Is the horse a companion or a livestock animal? In terms of thoroughbred breeding or racing, it is close to an industrial animal. In terms of equestrian sports or rehabilitation area, it is close to a companion animal. So the horse has both sides of the characteristic. Comparing to the livestock animal, the welfare status of the horse is generally better. We are using individual names, identification and registration, passport, electrical TVs as usual. Also, we are managing the stable and environment clean and taking care of health very well. Yes, money talks. Many other services on the horse are provided too. The welfare status of the horse may be considered generally good, but not enough yet. You can find many reports on the issues of the horse welfare from the media. Now, I'll talk about new strategic plan of KRA for improving the horse welfare in Korea. Why now? 2017 horse industry survey showed that there are 210 horses and 619 donkeys and mules in Korea. Economic impact of horse industry is estimated at 3.2 billion US dollars. As you may know, there are 3 race courses, 190 breeding farms, and 512 riding facilities. Since 2012, the annual reports show that horse industry in Korea is continuously growing, but it is still at the early stage of development. So we need to set the right guidelines for the future. Why KRA? KRA is the unique body of horse racing with almost 100 years of history and developing a leading company of the horse industry designated by the government. KRA has very effective and concentrated structures with many competitive and specialized human resources. So it's quite natural that KRA should do it right now. KRA prepared 200 pages of strategic plans last year, spending almost 6 months. 5 TF members were organized in Equine Veterinary Center, 30 more vets and 3 farriers were communicating with, and 4 reviewers out of KRA added their efforts. The purpose of these plans was to improve general welfare status of the horse to help people to be happy with their horses. A motto was set, make the world of happiness, both for human and horse. And 20 tasks in 4 groups were selected after brainstorming and many discussions. Also, perspective roadmap was set as 3 steps, from the short-term plan to the long-term plans. Briefly speaking, setting guidelines and education at first, leading social movements and communication at second, and R&D, governmental support, and global standardization as third. At every step, education and communications are paramount. It was also named as a horse welfare level project. There are 4 groups of tasks: regulations, monitoring, evaluation, research, and education and communications. In these 4 groups, you can find subtitles to do. Not all the tasks are shown here. Some of these tasks are already familiar to us because we've been doing as a separate plans, but newly organized on the base of the horse welfare, and others are newly added. 24-hour emergency networking and Hall of Fame for the retired horses seem to be interesting and expected to be one of the landmarks. This shows the acting structure of these plans. With the strategic and financial support from the government, KRA is managing and controlling these plans with close cooperations of the regional government, racing unions, breeders, trainers, jockeys, equestrian unions, and club riders, horse business owners and employees, schools and colleges of the horse industry, animal welfare groups, as well as the equine veterinarians. The axis is composed of MAFRA, the government, KRA, and the veterinary department. I remember at the first day of the horse welfare session, Dr. Kusano from Japan asked a good question to the speakers. If any governmental support were made for horse welfare project in other countries. Now, I'm happy to answer to his question. In Korea, this horse welfare project, we call the horse welfare level project, is supported by the national government by strategic plans and with budgets of 600,000 US dollars for 3 years for the campaigning this project. It's time to close. My conclusions are very simple. All lives are special and precious by themselves. Horse welfare is as important as human welfare, but it cannot be the same. At this point, I'd like to say to the conservative human welfareists that please don't worry too much on horse welfare, because we are not speaking only the horse welfare. Rather, we are speaking about some balance or harmony. I believe the horse welfare state of the horse, the welfare status of the horse will improve as time goes. Only with our efforts and cooperations, then great progress will be followed. Thank you for listening.
Dr. Park, thank you very much indeed. That concludes the presentations for equine welfare. Thank you to all of you. Right, if you'd like to make your way back into the seats, we have a special presentation now, which is the change to the schedule. The chairman of the Asian Racing Federation, Winfried Engelbrecht-Bresges, will come onto the stage to talk about the potential developments that are taking place in China's Hainan province. Either way, it's okay. There are steps on both sides. Winfried, over to you.
So good morning, and apologies that I'm standing in the way, obviously, of a well-deserved lunch break. I would like to give you an update in relation to developments who come out of China, and especially in relation to the Hainan province. There have been many questions raised in here around the corridors. What is the news regarding announcements regarding potential liberalization of flat racing and potential sports racing-related lottery in the long run? And the buzz in China and around the corridors obviously is significant. We are definitely not in a position to have any definite judgment, but I think it's probably good in the context of the conference to familiarize you which was the basis for this kind of speculation. First of all, Hainan is an island in the southern part of China with a tropical and subtropical climate, and it brands itself as China Hawaii. I highly recommend you don't go there during Chinese New Year because it's completely overcrowded and a room costs you more than $1,000 US. So it's worth a visit. But the history of Hainan is, it was part of the Guangdong province since 1988, and then it became a separate province. And that was in the time when Deng Xiaoping was opening up the Chinese economy, and it became a special economic zone. It was included in the special economic zone plan, like Shenzhen, who's now one of the biggest technology hubs in the world. If one looks at China, development of Hainan, further development was in 2009, when the government announced its plan to establish Hainan as an international tourism center by 2020. The announcement definitely contributed to a significant increase in economic activities. The year-on-year increase in investment was 136.9% in the first 3 months of 2010. Despite the policies to develop Hainan into an international tourism attraction, it is more a national tourist attraction. 30 million visitors in 2017, only 3%, 1 million, comes from international destinations, including Hong Kong and Macau and Taiwan. Hainan ranked in the bottom half of the Chinese provinces, so it's not, in a way, beside tourism, really a flourishing province. There is, in a way, and was always more attention paid to attract tourism, and the Miss World's pageant and the Boa Forum call Hainan now their home. Historically, Hainan has not a history of horse racing. There were, in the past 25 years, some developments, but they all failed. In 1992, there was investment into a race course called Heiko Race Course, but it, in a way, was pretty quickly shelved. Then, in a way, they had other developments in 93, 95. There was a significant support of the provincial government to build a racetrack. There were even, with a hotel complex, there were $500 million spent, but in the end, 200 horses were there. In the end, the project was shelved. 2009 was an important year for Hainan, because there's a state council proposal, what I mentioned as developed as a tourist destination. And I think it is definitely that in this proposal, interesting enough, there was already mentioned the development of guessing-type lottery, games connected to sports and international competitions. That was an important policy direction. In 2011, there were initial achievements made, and in relation to the lottery, additional forms of lottery were established, including lotteries on cycling and flying fish, which is a simulated guessing swimming game. In relation to horse racing, everything kept dormant till 2015, but then there was a formation of the Hainan Equestrian Association under the provincial government, and there was a loosely defined term that includes, if you know, equestrian, includes speed racing and equestrian. So I think, therefore, it was still a little bit vague what the Hainan Equestrian Association meant. There were some proposals submitted in mid-2015, and it was incorporated in the 5-year plan to look at equestrian development in Hainan. There were then, in a way, in 2015 already a significant increase in registration of commercial entities who registered with horse racing as a purpose. But then the government decided to ban further registration of these entities because they thought that speculating about horse racing, especially with a link to gambling, that this would be probably inappropriate. A major milestone occurred now in April 11th with the release of the State Council suggestions on deepening reform and opening up of Hainan province. So overall strategy positioning of this document is clearly focused on deepening the reforms and to conduct experiments within the areas of economic system reform and governance social management system reform, and actively explore more open economic policies, as well as the establishment of an international level center of tourism and consumption. What I think is most relevant probably to us is then the chapter 12, paragraph 12, chapter 5, paragraph 12, who says, encourage the development of beach sports, water sports, horse racing, etc. It's notable that for the first time, the word horse racing is used, and not only talking about equestrian sport, which I think is definitely a change in how equestrian is described, but it was used to be put into context in the tourism section. And then in a separate sentence, it was mentioned to explore the possibility of guessing type games on major international sports events. So therefore, it's 2 sentences. One has to be very mindful that it's 2 sentences, not 1 sentence. It is probably first noting that on May 14th, the Hainan provincial government said that all necessary preparations are in place to implementing central government's policy directions, especially in the areas of trade, investment, financial policy, entry, exit, with major progress expected by 2020. There was not a mentioning of horse racing or guessing games. So the policy is very clear. The central government wants to make Hainan a very vibrant economic development, but horse racing, probably one has to be a little bit more guarded. But still, in a way, this news led to an explosion of interest in really a very short period of time. No fewer than 5 major commercial corporations in China announced plans to participate in Hainan's equestrian development. Their initial concept of project include numerous proposals in cities all around the island. One is in Haikou, which is the northern part, the other one is in Sanya in the southern part. Thus, so far, most proposed projects are initiated by commercial entities, not by central government. The Hainan Equestrian Association, which is privately owned by few people, announced the concept of a 2,800-meter race course in Haikou with a $20 billion investment, renminbi, sorry, not US dollars, not yet, including additional facilities in the middle of a race course for equestrian and other forms of entertainment. So the lottery association, it's a GAS, which is a central government owned or managed, had to step in and cool speculation from the market regarding liberalization of horse racing and related lotteries and wagering. They stressed again that horse racing and guessing games were mentioned in separate sentences within the policy document, and by no means suggest that the government is ready to open wagering on horse racing. Having said this, I think we would like to highlight 3 major things to get a better understanding about this document. First, the Chinese central government is very determined to achieve true mileage, making Hainan a free trade port, a policy similar to what happened to Hong Kong in the beginning, with an unprecedented policy support to open up the island in terms of tourism, free trade, and potentially a testing ground for sensitive activities, bracket horse racing. President Xi has shown a track record of getting things done, and Hainan has now received its direct attention. So I think there is a saying, will be not fire, not just smoke, there will be fire. So there is a special attention of the central government to the general development of Hainan. But the business model and requirements for established horse racing in Hainan are not well understood. The government is in a very initial stage of scoping a feasibility study, and several factors in a way which are key for determining a success of horse racing and the objectives, the business model, target population, all these issues have not been in a way scoped out. Even technical factors, if one wants to have it as an international event for equestrian or for horse racing, like disease-free zones, all these issues are definitely not even on the radar screen of a lot of people who are talking about it. In relation to combination with sports lottery, very unclear. In China, a lot of times you have models where you have to run something for 3 or 4 years before it's then considered for a further step. So I think the whole issue regarding wagering is definitely not well understood. We can see that it comes to wagering on international sporting events, bracket sports betting, that is probably a little bit more feasible, and there are already other activities which, if you look at the China Sports Lottery, who has sports wagering, lottery wagering on international sporting events, especially football and basketball. So it is that the Chinese central government has definitely not announced a liberalization of horse racing. It is a very interesting development, and I think it's something we think it's definitely worth monitoring. And what we plan is, as soon as there's a little bit more, a better understanding, that we definitely will update in a way our delegates, and maybe we have a special conference even about this topic. But at this stage, I would say hold your horses, listen more on what's happening, and I hope, in a way, therefore, we can go now for lunch without thinking we will have horse racing with betting tomorrow in Hainan or in China. Thank you.
Winfried, thank you very much. So my clock says 11:21. At 11:45, we'll be back here for a session on anti-illegal betting and the issue of money laundering. Thank you very much indeed.